A mob beat to death 50-year-old Iklok after rumors that his family had allegedly consumed beef.
फादर को मैंने देखा था लास्ट डे, जब देखने पर भी रो कांप जाए।
घर में घुसे वो, बस किसी के हाथ में लाठी के डंडे, बेड के नीचे से ईंटें निकाली, उसको मारने लगे। भैया को, पापा जी को टांग पकड़ के घसीटते हुए ले गए बाहर। पापा जी को और हमें बात करने का मौका ही नहीं दिया उन्होंने। बस कह रहे थे कि तुम्हें जिंदा नहीं छोड़ेंगे, तुमने गाय काट दिए।
दलितों पे अत्याचार नहीं सहेंगे, नहीं सहेंगे, नहीं सहेंगे, गंदा काम नहीं करेंगे, नहीं करेंगे, नहीं करेंगे, संडा साफ नहीं करेंगे, नहीं करेंगे, नहीं करेंगे।
दलित आंदोलन एक आत्मसम्मान की लड़ाई है और स्वाभिमान का आंदोलन है। तो मेरे साथ 2 मिनट के लिए खड़े हो जाएं। ये शपथ लेते हैं, आज के बाद कतर में उतरेंगे नहीं, मरे हुए पशु के निकाल का काम भी करेंगे नहीं।
The presenters will address as many questions as they can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. At any time during the webinar, just type your question into the Q&A button at the bottom of your control panel. During the Q&A, you will be promoted to panelists, so please turn off your camera if you do not want to be seen. We will be recording this webinar and we'll share the link after the event. We are committed to providing a moderated, non-judgmental virtual space and harassment-free online experience. We fully welcome disagreement, provided it is expressed with courtesy. Participants who fail to conduct themselves accordingly will be removed. Now, I'll hand this over to our moderator for today, Dipti Gupta. She is Professor of Cinema and Communication at Dawson College and Concordia University in Montreal. Dipti?
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for organizing this event and giving me this opportunity to moderate as well. It is a difficult time for all who have lost loved ones during this pandemic and far from their family and friends. But this event is also an affirmation that we can form communities and create connections during this time. It is an honor to discuss Anand Patwardhan's work on this platform today with academics in the presence of the esteemed filmmaker himself. Anand Patwardhan is India's most important documentary filmmaker. He has been making political documentaries that pursue diverse and controversial issues that are at the crux of social and political life in India. He has produced and directed 19 documentaries over a span of 50 years, which DocuSeek has procured and made available for streaming. Anand Patwardhan has persisted in his resistance. His documentary work serves as a crucial testament to several critical periods in India's development and several key issues facing the people of India. What I admire most about Anand is that he is not just committed to the research, shooting, and directing of his work, but also taking the time to tour, hold discussions, involve the communities, and engage with the people that he interviews. This is the most comprehensive, dedicated method of filmmaking. It is to be noted that he has done this with each and every one of his films. Today, we shall discuss the role of this work in the face of rising authoritarianism, nationalism, religious intolerance around the world, and its role within our institutions and teaching practices. I will now briefly introduce our panelists. We have Professor Jyotsna Kapoor, who is a professor of cinema and media studies and director of the University Honors Program at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. She's the co-editor of studies in South Asian film and media, and the author, most recently, of The Politics of Time and Youth in Brand India, Bargaining with Capital. This came out in 2013 by London Anthem Press. James Lane is a professor of religious studies at Macalester College, St. Paul, Minnesota, where he has taught since 1985. Professor Lane has done considerable field work in India and has written 4 books, including Shivaji, Hindu King in Islamic India, which came out by Oxford 2003, and Meta Religion Power in World History from University of California Press 2014, amongst others. Finally, also we have Professor Ali Kazmi, is an award-winning filmmaker, media artist, and author. His films deal with race, migration, memory, and social justice. In 2019, he received the Governor General's Award, Canada's foremost distinction for excellence in visual and media arts. The same year, University of British Columbia conferred him with the Doctor of Letters. He is an associate professor in the Department of Cinema and Media Arts, York University, where he has also served as the chair of the department. We shall be in discussion with this group and the filmmaker with us, and for about 45 minutes, and then we'll be opening the session to our audience, who can ask questions directed to any member of the panel. You can also leave your questions in the chat, as Julie mentioned, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. I shall begin with Professor Kapoor. Jyotsna, as a film scholar, where do you place Anand's work? And what is the value of Anand's work in the North American teaching context today?
Right. I just want to begin, with the title of our panel itself, The Rise of Authoritarianism, and Anand's work in relationship to that. So we just simply cannot deny the role media has played in creating authoritarianism. And I think of Goebbels, who is the Minister for Propaganda for Hitler, saying that the point is not to distort reality. It's not to just create fake news, but it's actually to destroy the sense of reality altogether. So what mainstream media, and including like social media by authoritarian governments, has produced is this complete sense of shock and awe, right? Where we're just in the trailer, we saw those lynch videos, we're seeing videos of police brutality. Now we're seeing these images of the devastation going on in India right now under COVID. So these kinds of media spectacles are, on the one hand, really encouraging and empowering these sadistic impulses humans have, right? And on the other hand, if you're at the receiving end, it creates terror and fear and panic. So we're sort of numbed, right? Like if you fall on the authoritarian spectrum, if you feel you're safe, then you want newer and newer forms of sadistic experience and thrill. And if you're at the receiving end, it's just sheer fear, terror, and panic. And I think in that, Anand's work, and the title of the last film, Reason, is so right. It gives us a sense of history. It gives us analysis. It teaches us to think historically, to say, why are we where we are now, right? And it is animated by a democratic impulse, because he puts his films together by talking to people, and reality emerges from these conversations we see happening in front of us. So which teaches us to reason, to think about the difference between right and wrong, and to think with our heads and hearts. So I think his work is absolutely important for universities and libraries at this moment is we have a role to play in being on the side of democracy and not on the side of authoritarianism. And I think taking a more recent example, Darnella Fraser, the 17-year-old who stood and recorded Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd, and she was in flip-flops and she held her camera, not flinching, staring into the eyes, the cold eyes of Derek Chauvin. She comes in this lineage of filmmaking, which has stood with people's movements, with struggles for democracy. And Anand has a lifetime of work from which we can learn and see the process. I also think his films are an archive of India, at least since the 1970s, if you want to see these egalitarian movements. And it's also about the power of cinema, how it can kind of keep history alive in a way that, you know, we can read about it in books, but to actually see in his films, you know, to see the priest in Babri Masjid, you know, in Ayodhya talking about his anger at what is going on, right? So it's a memory that we keep, that Anand's films have kept alive for us and, you know, for generations. So his films are an example of that there was a battle that was being fought, right? That there was resistance, which sometimes is forgotten when history is rewritten or, you know, written by the conquerors. The resistance just goes away. So I want to, you know, sort of end here by just saying what moves me most about Anand's films, and I can see them over and over again, is the optimism in a way that animates them. And it's not an unrealistic, foolish kind of optimism. One is justice, belief, and reason ends with that, you know, struggles will continue as long as oppression continues. You know, a simple sort of statement, but also the people he brings on the screen. You know, they build genuine optimism that we can come out of this and we can move towards democracy rather than authoritarianism. So I think in those two ways, both as what it is as cinema, as a form of history, as well as this democratic impulse, makes his work absolutely important for universities and libraries right now, and we should be showing it and discussing it. And his films actually open up discussion. They're not close-ended things. Okay, you watch and you go home. Now you've learned a lesson.
Thank you. Yeah, you're so right that, you know, it's actually the human spirit that comes through these films, all of this work, and the resilience that people have also. And there's so much to learn from them. I would like to actually also ask Professor James Lane that in 2018, you know, Anand's film Reason won the first Best Feature-Length Documentary at the International Documentary Film Festival at Amsterdam. I need to impress upon here is that it is the largest documentary festival in the world, where 8,000 films are shown and are submitted, and Anand's film won the first prize. However, Anand's work also faced political censorship in India. Could you shed light as to how does one navigate issues of censorship imposed by the state, and how do academic institutions address it?
Sorry, I had a little muting problem there. This should be an easy question to answer. Not. You know, it's been my honor to know Anand for some time. I got to know him first when my own book was being banned in India, and he took action on that legal case, not at my behest, but on his own initiative with some other people to try to oppose censorship of any sort. And it was through that encounter that I got to know him. I'd known his films for many years, And I knew that in many cases, if not all, he can correct us here. Whenever he brings out a film, the government is going to take steps to censor it, to ban it, what have you. And he has fought a number of legal battles to overcome that. So it's really a badge of honor that his film may come under that kind of censorship, because it points to something that I think is really critical. The book that I wrote that got me in trouble, I had a line in there that I said, it's important for us to articulate unthinkable thoughts. And unthinkable thoughts are those things where people have been so immersed in a certain kind of discourse, so immersed in a certain way of thinking, that they do not allow themselves. And this is where power is really manifest, not when you're crushed under the weight of a military oppression or police brutality. The worst kind of oppression is when you're not allowed to think certain thoughts or even entertain certain thoughts. And I think his movies help us to begin to probe some of those things in an important way. A number of scholars in recent years have been talking about a kind of assault on history that at important Indian universities, JNU in Delhi and elsewhere, there have been a number of attempts to silence historians who are doing important critical work on history because it was insufficiently patriotic, if you will. And that sort of assault, of course, destroys the capacity of scholars to do their work with any kind of freedom. We see in a number of these films, In the Name of God or Ram Ke Naam, questions, these little innocent questions that Anand is a master of in his interview style. In most of these, we don't see his face, but we hear his calm voice. In what century was Ram born? This seemingly innocent question, which causes some discomfort among his interviewees. They see suddenly that they're making a claim that Ram was born in this particular place, and yet they could not say within 1,000 years when Ram lived or when he was born, and so on. And this just, and he doesn't go on to interrogate that question. He leaves the question hanging there. I think Jyotsna pointed that these films don't end with an obvious conclusion, beating you over the head with a Sunday school lesson, but they raise these probing questions that then allow people to think about things. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would want to mention here is, besides the sort of overt forms of censorship, there's always the question that's being fought out in India today. If you say, well, we wanted to get to the history of this matter. And the next question, sometimes smugly posed in a kind of postmodern way, is, well, whose history? Whose history are we writing? And the other sort of postmodern question often that lingers there is, can the subaltern speak? And we've been troubled by that one. Do scholars who have access to the English language, who have access to the top academic presses, or are they framing the questions in a way that that feature their interests and so on, but do not really get at the way in which people may be thinking about things who do not have that microphone, if you will? Can the subaltern speak? Gayatri Spivak is famous for asking these questions. But I think if you watch Anand's films carefully, we see, yes, they can, given the right circumstances. And I'm thinking of so many interviews where he comes to a garbage worker in Mumbai, worried about the equipment he's been given by his employer to do his job, when he interviews a woman in a village who's been harassed as being, quote, untouchable by her employers. When, as Jyotsna said, when he interviews the pujari or the priest at the Ram temple, these are people who may not have had a voice in academic circles, and yet now are given this platform in which to speak, and it's often very profound. Another point along those same lines of who gets to speak is that the interview style is so non-aggressive that often people are given the chance to reveal who they really are in ways that they may regret later. By which I mean they're allowed to hang themselves. His calm way of interviewing people, of not pushing his own position and so on, allows people to admit that they think that the murder of Mahatma Gandhi was maybe not such a bad thing, or something along those lines. You know, sort of outrageous things that people are lured into saying because of his calm, sort of step back interview style. I don't want to go on and on here, Deepti, but I have a couple more things I might say if you think we have time.
For sure. Would you like to just take a few minutes to cover that? That's
Let
fine.
me just say a couple things that for people who are watching or thinking about the value of these films for classroom use. I've used many of these films in classroom setting. They are not discipline specific, so that they are appropriate for so many different disciplines, whether one is interested in environmental studies and nuclear issues about nuclear war or the use of nuclear power, women's and gender studies. There are many films that address issues there that are appropriate. So sociology, anthropology, history, political science, you name it, they're all these things because they focus on particular human problems that can be addressed from a number of different disciplinary perspectives, but they're valuable for scholars, academics, professors, teachers in a number of settings. And they're free from the jargon of any particular discipline so that students find them very accessible. I teach only undergraduate students, and they always find these films very, very engaging. So I think those are things that make them extremely valuable for a library collection. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. That's perfect. That segues perfectly to the question I'm going to be asking Professor Kazmi. Ali, as teachers, we are often asked to teach the canon. The canon often comprises mostly of North American and European films. Why are Anand's films not part of the canon also? Can we rethink the canon? How can we decolonize teaching practices also? And I know that you're probably informed in so multiple ways of Anand's work, and it has informed your practices also.
Thank you, Deepti. I think you've, in a way, answered your own question. The canon that is often presented to North American students still tends to be very Eurocentric, and by Eurocentric, I mean not just literally around Europe, but in it I include the larger Eurosphere of white settler states such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, of course. And within that, other parts of the world somehow are diminished, or the films that are made by filmmakers from those areas are often given primacy. But of course, Anand's work has managed to break down those barriers and is very, very much part of the, I believe it's part of the documentary canon for sure, and certainly the filmmaking canon. And for me, it has been, as both a practitioner and a teacher, it's been a great privilege to have Anand as a friend and colleague. When I started as a filmmaker in 1983 in India, I had experienced Anand's film A Time to Rise, which was ironically shot in Canada, where I now live. And I remember at that point, the Ministry of External Affairs had issued a directive saying that this was a film that would damage the bilateral relations between India and Canada, and therefore it should not be shown. And of course, they forgot to see that the film was produced by the National Film Board of Canada. It wasn't just an independent production. And I remember meeting Anand, and I was in film school then. I remember meeting him, and he said, he encouraged me to move beyond what I was being taught in school, and to think for myself. And one of the things that that has always inspired me about his work is something that Jim mentioned, is his deep commitment and humanism and compassion for so-called ordinary people. And I find this is such a model for all of us to emulate. I find it inspiring to show it to my students, to see how people, seemingly, again, ordinary people, who are often within the Indian context seen as being expendable, at the margins, deprived of their rights, who are given the space, the dignity, the respect, and the platform to present a perspective that is often deeply rich with wisdom, and so contrary to the kind of victimhood imposed on them by media at large. And it's been mentioned that his work is an archive of India, but I would say it's more than an archive. It really, at this historic moment that we are in, where this horrific genocidal catastrophe is unfolding in India, where each of us who has friends and family in India wake up every morning to cries of desperation and pleas for beds, oxygen, or news of the death or impending death of friends and family. I think his films offer us a clear trajectory of how we, and I say we because this is no longer contained by borders. This catastrophe knows no borders. It truly is global. But how did we arrive at this? And the arrival stems, the question that Anand asks in all his films, fundamentally starts with asserting his position as a citizen, as a responsible citizen in a democracy. And he takes his role as a citizen to the best possible way, which is he engages in dissent. He seeks to hold people accountable. And he does so fearlessly, and with a groundedness that is profoundly inspiring and essential for us to recognize at this moment. And as a documentary filmmaker, and as Anand, along with other independent documentary filmmakers, and certainly Anand at the forefront of it, has been a canary in the gold mine, in the coal mine, because the kinds of censorship and forces that he's been subjected to in terms of trying to deny him the ability to reach audiences with his film have been a very early indicator of what's happened to the media in India today. If Anand was seen as an outlier, troublemaker, who inevitably will get into this, now I'm giving you the kind of the mainstream perspective. Of course, he makes trouble. Of course, he'll face repression from the government. Well, that very section of Indian society is now discovering that the entire media has been forced to toe the line and has become essentially a propaganda arm of a very authoritarian government that has completely destroyed many pillars of democracy in India. And I had asked, another thing that strikes me about Anand is how he uses his privileged position without drawing attention to it. And he does it again with immense commitment and courage. I remember asking Anand once, there was a spotlight on Anand's work in that documentary festival in Toronto, Hot Docs. And I was given the privilege of interviewing him on stage. And I asked him, what would have happened if someone like me and let me specify that, a Muslim from India had made the kinds of films that he had made, specifically with the rise of Hindutva, this fundamentalist Hindu nationalist ideology. And Anand didn't blink. He looked at me and he said, "You'd be dead." So it's a moment that I haven't forgotten, and it was in those few words he summed up the kinds of decades-long risks that are entailed in bearing witness to this rise. And this rise is, while it might speak, while we might be speaking of an India-specific thing, but it's not. We've seen this across many countries. Certainly in the US, you have, just by a very narrow margin, missed the rise of an authoritarian regime, and have dodged the authoritarian bullet by a very, very narrow margin. And it has certainly shown you that even among so-called robust democracies, the possibility of the rise of populism and attendant authoritarianism is a very real threat, and it's a threat that's not going away. For me, Jim has mentioned that the work speaks not just within the context of a specific, say, India-centric program or India-centric courses. This is the kind of work that is truly intersectional. It can be used, and I know it is used by colleagues who teach law, who teach policing. My neighbor is a professor in the University of Toronto, and she teaches policing, and she uses Anand's work from the perspective of policing, of shedding a light on how policing is informed by political decisions, and what are the consequences of that happening. I also think that, apart from his work in charting the rise of Hindu nationalist ideology, his other work is equally important. His War and Peace, I think, is a profoundly important film. We are no closer. In fact, the threat of nuclear war today is even greater, given the proliferation of nuclear weapons, given the incredibly rapidly shifting geopolitics, given that arms treaties are being dismantled, and there is ongoing research. The US is rearming itself with new nuclear weapons, as is Russia, as is the UK, and of course China. So and India, of course, is the latest member of this infamous club, and that has consequences, and I think so that War and Peace becomes a really important, a vital piece of the conversation of looking at the proliferation of nuclear arms in a truly international sense, outside the Cold War binary that is often seen in the West. And yeah, so I'll stop there. I just think that for me, this is truly essential work. It's work that inspires me. I've watched it inspire countless students from all backgrounds, and yeah. So Anand. It's such a great privilege to be here and to truly celebrate your work. And hopefully, I'm appealing to all the librarians watching this, that I think that this is the kind of work that needs to be, that people, professors, not just within the narrow confines of South Asia studies, but across the board, need to be made aware of this work. Thank you.
Jyotsna, I feel like you have something to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a small thing. I think for all like faculty and librarians listening in today, we also have a role to play in the community. And so these films should be organized for communities, for our local communities. We still have a certain degree of autonomy, you know, and Ali, you're right, we escaped Trump just like this by a narrow margin. We, you know, universities would have had even more severe forms of censorship here. So it's, his films are, they teach you a method. You know, it's a way of knowing, and knowing by knowing history, but then also talking to people and observing what's going on around you and how individuals work in circumstances. I also just wanted to say a quick thing here. I'm a member of a diasporic group called INSAF India. INSAF stands for International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India. And we're just trying, we're made up of people from Europe, North America, Australia, and we're just trying to raise awareness about the authoritarian, the Hindutva authoritarianism going on in India right now. So, you know, again, Anand's work becomes such an important way to bring to life this process that has been ongoing. So thank you, Anand. It's really good to see you again.
Great. I mean, we all cannot impress about how intersectional and interdisciplinary this work is. Anand, before I actually open the floor for all of our viewers also, I would like to ask a question is that, you know, when you heard about that DocuSeek is going to be streaming all of your work and promoting it also, what was your reaction? And what would you say to the students and librarians and academics who are here? How could they use, and I'm you know, as Ali said, is that many people are already using this work all across, but we need to actually spread it. I always feel very strongly that if many people see this work, there would be a better planet. I always actually sincerely believe that. So Anand, if you could respond to how the students can actually react to this work too, or embrace it.
Yeah, so as you all pointed out, it's very difficult for me to show my films legally in India. I mean, the best we can do right now is to put something online, but we don't attract enough eyeballs for it to make a difference, for it to make a real political change. But at least those constraints are not there, showing these films in North America, Canada, where there is more academic freedom, certainly. And so I'm really happy that there's a platform where people can see them legally. I mean, here we have to do it by any means necessary.
There is a question in the chat where somebody's asked is like, what changes have you seen over the years of your work in India? In the context of caste, discrimination, and the current political dynamics, what is your message to young adults in India who are keen on developing the country?
Oh, I don't have a single message to people in India except that I think the message you see when you put on any channel on TV, you see what's happening if you have the eyes to see that. I mean, of course, we've had a long period by which people were literally brainwashed into believing that the government that we have is doing something positive for the country, making India great. I mean, basically Donald Trump language, make America great again. So this is the exact same mentality that has been created in India, by which they think that promoting the single religion ideology, by weaponizing ourselves, we are going to be great, that we have made it on the map. So if I don't have a message as such, but I think that people who watch the films will get hundreds of different ways of understanding how people resist, because I mean, you and I can do so much, but people who are actually facing the brunt are actually the real heroes and heroines that are fighting the battle. Um, I'm just an observer pointing out what's going on.
I would actually ask if what Alex can probably open up the forum also for all our viewers. But in the meantime, if there are any questions amongst the panelists also, if you would like to say something or a comment or a question to Anand, that would be great. Alex, are you? Yeah,
Hi
go
to,
ahead, Julie.
I just wanted to say hi to Ali, for I haven't seen him for a while.
I just want to quickly, there was a question actually that came in prior to this event. It is, the question is about the current COVID crisis in India, and if Anand, if you are planning any projects about related themes and issues.
Okay. So, unfortunately, last year I had a physical problem. I mean, I had a heart issue. And so I've been told strictly not to take that kind of risk right now of going out into the open to shoot. So while I would have loved to have been filming in Delhi, where the farmers movement it's the most historical movement that has happened in India for a very long time, where hundreds of thousands of farmers are sitting out for months on end in the bitter cold of winter, and now going into the summer at the height of the COVID pandemic, and are sitting there um, refusing to leave, just um, blocking the highways if they wherever they could, or just sitting by the side of the road, um, because what the government is trying to do is to turn over the entire agricultural sector to agro-business without any hearing from the farmers themselves, and so I would have loved to have been filming that, but luckily there are many people doing that filming, and there are many people with their cell phones that are shooting, who are not necessarily filmmakers but who are documenting it, and I'm sure something wonderful will come out. Many films will come out of that process. So I'm personally using the lockdown time to put together some kind of a home movie. I filmed with my parents when they were alive and over the years, and there's a little bit of oral history there, but maybe it'll be just nostalgia for the family and won't be that useful for other people. But I think in between there will be oral history, because my family, many of them were part of the freedom movement against the British. So yeah, there'll be some glimpses of that.
But I add one thing there, is that I think those who watch the film Reason, Vivek, it's completely prophetic. Maybe you're not documenting the disaster, the COVID disaster right now, but you had already prophesied what happens when there's an abandonment of rational thinking in regard to what the science shows us and so forth. And when you see now on the news, the scenes of the Kumbh Mela happening in the middle of a COVID pandemic, you see the results of that. So,
and elections which, like the Bengal elections, should have been conducted. It's not a huge state in India compared to many other states. These elections should have taken 3 or 4 days, but they stretched them out for a whole month in 8 different chapters of the election in one state, because they wanted Narendra Modi to be able to address different crowds, and he only had limited time where he could go there. So they spread out the election so that he could have more visits, because they didn't have enough people on the ground in Bengal. They don't have a huge presence in Bengal, and so they have condemned the state to COVID, because these were huge rallies from they were mainly the ruling party, but also opposition parties did the same. because they had to match it. And yeah, we've gone through a terrible period of electioneering and religious festivals like the Kumbh Mela. Um, if you recall, I don't know if you uh, outside India got this, but in the early stages of when COVID broke out, there was a huge noise made about the Muslim gathering in Delhi, the Tablighi Jamaat, and they blamed COVID entirely on this group of Muslims who had gathered in Delhi, who had come from abroad to this meeting. And now they've conveniently forgotten that the Hindu uh, religious festivals have been even larger than that, much larger than that. Plus, at the same time that the Tablighi Jamaat event was happening in Delhi, Narendra Modi invited Donald Trump to Gujarat and had a huge stadium where hundreds of thousands of people gathered just at the time when COVID was coming into the world in a big way. And that must have been a super spreader as well. But nobody talks about that.
Anand, there are a couple of people who are asking about that. Do you fear for your life, and where do you get this courage from? If you would like to answer that.
Uh, I've been asked that too many times.
Yeah, because I think people are fearful of your life. That's probably why they ask that question.
But I'm 71 years old already. So I've had a long innings, and I managed to make it so far. And I think I will make it further because I think actually the worst thing that can happen is that you become so afraid that you stop speaking. And that has happened to many people. But I won't let that happen because, firstly, the risks that I take are minimal compared to the risks that people that I film are taking every day. I mean, as Ali, I again come back to the question that Ali asked me, what would happen if he had made this film? And no, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Dalit. I'm not part of the most oppressed sections of society in India. And being part of the privileged, I have a responsibility to use my position to be a witness at least.
Thank you. There is one question that has been asked for all the panelists also, that as a film about, no, this is actually for all the panelists. I'm so sorry. That if anybody has a thought on the research and resource that examine the role of women without it serving the cause of patriarchy or misogyny. One documentary that comes to my mind is Nisha Pahuja's World Before Her. Are there any others that people could actually think about right now? Or Anand, yourself also, if you have any of the films. I mean, most of your films actually address the genders very, very, in a very balanced way. So I actually really find that always very refreshing. But is there...
The one film that I made, which was specifically talking about gender, was Father, Son, and Holy War, which was a film that was completed in 1995, and it became a part of a trilogy. I hadn't planned to make a trilogy, but I started making films on religious violence, and the first film was on Punjab, the second film was In the Name of God, Ram Ke Naam. And the third film was Father, Son, and Holy War, where I looked at religion from the point of view of masculinity and India being such a patriarchal. I mean, every country is, and every religion is patriarchal, but I basically started thinking about it. I don't think very theoretically, so I actually fell upon this because I went after a sati had happened in Rajasthan in 1987, where Rup Kanwar was burnt alive on her husband's funeral pyre, and I went there after the event and talked to some of the perpetrators as well, because I mean, it was an unbelievable event. But and I also saw that hundreds of thousands of people were celebrating this act of sati. That's because sati is considered to be a goddess. I mean, if you die on your husband's funeral pyre, and so that became a part of Father, Son, and Holy War. And I started thinking about the relationship between masculinity and patriarchy and religion.
Actually, just to, somebody else is also asking about if there is a sequel to your film, Narmada, A Time to Rise. Is there going to be one? Because so much has happened since then also.
But no, I didn't understand. Time to Rise is not a sequel
No,
to
no, sorry. Narmada, A Valley Rises. I apologize.
Ali's film. Yeah, both Ali and I, me and Simantini made a film called Narmada Diary, and he made A Valley Rises. So in fact, must be 30 or 40 films on this movement. It's such a magnificent movement that has gone on, still continues. Although the dam has already been built, but the movement became like a green left movement, which is still alive all over the country.
Mm-hmm. And somebody has also asked about your film, A Time to Rise, as a film about the Punjabis and the Canadian Farm Workers Union and filmed in British Columbia. How was the experience of connecting with the activists different from the other work you have done, if at all?
So that is a pretty early film of mine. I think it was the second or third film. And as it happened, I had actually worked with farm workers in America when I was a student in 1970. I was a student in America from 70 to 72. And in that period, at the end of my stay here, I actually joined the United Farm Workers Movement, the UFW, led by Cesar Chavez. And I went to California and I worked for 6 months after, I actually overstayed my visa. And after I finished my studies, and I worked with the farm workers there. And so I knew Cesar Chavez also. And then in 1981, when I came across 1980, I came across Indian farm workers in Canada who were trying to form a farm workers union. They actually succeeded and created Canada's first farm workers union. And then we invited Chavez to come to one of the rallies in Vancouver. So that's also a part of the film. So everything got connected up that way.
Did you always know that you wanted to go back because you were here working, studying in this part of the world? And did you always know that you wanted to go back to India?
Yes. I went back in 72. In fact, actually coming to America was a political awakening for me. Although I came from a family that had already fought the British, and so I should have been already politicized, but I wasn't. When I was 20 years old, I was like I'm going to America to see what it's like there. And I landed up in the middle of, Woodstock times in 1970, flower power and all that. But also at a time when the anti-Vietnam War movement was very strong. So that immediately politicized me, and I ended up, the first time I ever went to jail was in America fighting the Vietnam War, long before I went to jail in India.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There is a very long question in the chat, but I'm going to actually ask the last bit of it. It's like, how can there actually we can bring about the systemic change? Because they talk about all of your other films and how they're inspired by your work also. But how can we make a systemic change within our society also? Do you have any answers ever?
You mean as a filmmaker? Because
as a filmmaker, absolutely.
Okay. As a filmmaker, the one thing I realize is that it doesn't matter how wonderfully, it doesn't matter what you do with your film if you don't actually show it, or if the film is not seen enough, it's not going to make that much of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the frustrations, I don't have any frustration about making films, because ultimately, even with censorship and everything, you can manage to get the resources somehow and make a film, say what you want to say. But the real difficult part is, how do you show it? And that I haven't cracked that. I mean, I think this is one of the steps of getting it shown more widely. But if you look at, I've been making films for almost 50 years now. So, um, but I mean, how many people have actually watched them?
Yeah.
I don't think enough people have watched them to make a critical difference in the world.
Yeah. Will we be opening the session? Go ahead, Ali. I just
Yeah.
want to ask, is like, are we opening the session for all the
Yeah,
viewers?
so we are, if you want to raise your hand,
Okay.
we're finding that would be the best way if people want to ask a live question. So please raise your hand if you would like to ask
Perfect.
a live question.
Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Anand's disappointment for not reaching the widest number of people. I think, but at the same time, Anand, your work has inspired a couple of generation of filmmakers, if not more, and that in itself speaks to the power of the work. So whereas you might not see the immediate causal impact of your work, you have seeded many filmmakers and given them courage to do the kind of work that you've done. I think singularly the kinds of political films that are being made in India all use your work as a touchstone, and I think therefore in terms of the critical audiences, the academic audiences become really important in this context, right? I think the one can see academic, well, both professors and their students as multipliers of these films and their ideas. So I think what DocuSeek is doing is immensely important in that context.
Yeah, but I was pointing out I mean, let's look at television, because if documentary has a home, if you would think there would be a natural space for documentaries, you would think it was TV, because TV goes into everybody's home. But I'm not talking about India alone. I mean, I'm not talking about censorship. I'm talking about the market forces, which is the biggest censor of all. So,
absolutely.
So you don't have to be in an authoritarian space. You just have to be in a neoliberal space where they don't think this is going to make people buy chocolates or whatever they want to sell. So your film doesn't get on air. It doesn't reach millions of people. And so that is a frustration that I think you carry and I carry, and all of us who do this kind of work are in a sense marginalized. And even though we might have a little bit of a foot in the door in academia or maybe on the internet or something like that, but it's not making a critical difference. So that's the reality.
Yeah, and there are other forms of censorship, hidden forms of censorship in North America. One of them being errors and omissions insurance, which all North American filmmakers have to buy, which then essentially your film is vetted by your entertainment lawyer and a handful of companies, insurance companies, that then really put constraints on what you can say because of fear of lawsuits or libel. Or so on the one hand, yes, we can claim that there's no censorship, but there are hidden forms of censorship, as you said, market forces being one. And I just wanted to add errors and omissions insurance being the other, the critical one for documentary filmmakers here.
And I was also remembering the kind of struggle that you had with Netflix also, because when you see that Netflix can easily bring reason in chapters, the entire film is in chapters. And yet they said that if they managed to even market it, they would probably be kicked out of India. So
not probably, definitely.
Definitely kicked out of it. Okay. Kaveh has raised their hand. So go ahead, Kaveh.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, we are listening to you.
Hi, sorry for jumping in. I just wanted to mention that the Q&A chat box is full of questions in case you haven't seen them. And my own question is that basically we are watching this. Thank you so much, Anand and everyone. You're watching this with my girlfriend, and she has a question. She wants to ask Anand if he's happy to talk to us about possible filmmakers who have influenced him, had an impact on him, and the format and the way he makes his films. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. So I can't pinpoint one or two. I mean, if I had to pinpoint one particular film that impressed me a lot at a formative stage, it would be Battle of Chile by Patricio Guzman, documentation of what had happened in Chile during Salvador Allende's time, when this democratically elected socialist or communist leader and party was overthrown with the help of the CIA, and a brutal dictatorship was put in its place. And the film is again a very long film in many chapters that address that. It even had a scene in which one of the cameramen filmed his own death because he actually was shot by the police, by the military police, while he was filming, and somebody retrieved that footage. So that film had a huge impact. But then, yeah, a whole lot of Latin American liberation films, a lot of films that came out of the civil rights movement. In fact, DocuSeek before, I don't know if I'm right about this, but DocuSeek was Icarus films before, and groups like Tricontinental and Icarus showed a lot of these films in the 70s in America, and that's so I was able to see many such films.
There is a question for both Jim and Anand as well, that what do you think is driving the rise of fundamentalism? I assume you see commonality between fundamentalism in US and India and the Arab world as well. If Jim or Anand would like to answer that.
Well, probably a facile answer would be that we are living at a time in the world where there are depleting resources. That we are living where the water is running out, the oil is running out, fresh air is running out, everything is running out. And so there is a mad scramble for these resources. And the only way you could probably get to this position of power where you can get these resources and is by fooling the rest of the public. And one easy way to do that is to divide them with religion, which has been done by the colonial powers for centuries. And then when we in our colonies finally got independence, then our own rulers started to continue that process of divide and rule. So as I said, that is a facile answer, but I think Jim will have a better answer than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always teasing Anand that he's too hard on religion, and that's my business. That's how I make a living. No, I would agree, but I think there's another dimension to this, and I think it actually comes out in your films, which is my facile answer would be I hate the modern world. There are plenty of people for whom the rapid change in society, in the way family structure is changing, gender roles, all these kinds of things are very unsettling, especially for men. And I think a fearful reaction to that often is expressed in a certain kind of fundamentalist religion. It's an attempt to try to, in a nostalgic way, cling to something that may never have existed, but in the imagination existed as the golden age. And I think that drives a lot of this. And so I think, your focus, earlier we had a question on gender, I think your focus on a sort of certain kind of crisis of masculinity that drives a sort of, in fact, fearful, but it expresses itself as machismo, is part of it. So I've been kind of attentive to that for a while.
There is Link who has raised her hand if they would like to join.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for sharing these insights. So I have questions for Anand. I really admire your films and really your sense of justice and righteousness. And actually, I had a few questions written, but I also want to ask, because you mentioned third cinema, the Solanas and Gatino and Guzman, and of course, hours of furnaces were also banned sometime in Argentina, and they had to show underground people's apartments and factories. And you know, I read you also showed your film in the local communities. I think it's a great way to engage with people, because you are making documentaries. You don't want just the film festival attenders and attendees and the film professors and students talk about. You want to engage with the local people, try to make a change. And so I'm wondering if the new technologies, for instance, internet or mobile phone, would have impact on the, for instance, exhibition of your film. I know some people in Cuba or African countries, they circulate their films through files and internet. Of course, there's also maybe there are copyright issues, and as a documentary filmmaker, you also need some income to support your work. So I'm wondering, how do you think about this future direction of film distribution and discussion? And the second question, also my final question, is when, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Because I'll forget the first question.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I think that the fact that the technology has democratized and people can make films on their own phones, it has certainly made things more democratic in terms of people's access to production is much greater than it ever was. When I started out, there was only film, celluloid film, and we had heavy equipment and stuff like that. And now it's a lot easier to make something. But the act of showing films is still very problematic, because on the internet, you can put your film on the internet, but how do you get the eyeballs? I mean, the kinds of things that go viral are tiny. They're like literally 5-minute and 3-minute or 2-minute things, you know, on Instagram or something like that, that can go viral. But a long film which makes people, or tries to make people think for a few hours, that is still very difficult to put on the net. And what I've tried to, between the how to make an income and survive and how to maximize viewership, I've tried to strike a balance of some kind. I do put all of my films in Hindi language or Indian languages for free on the internet. But I try to restrict the use of the English subtitle versions so that can bring in some income while people are watching it, while still being accessible to those who speak English.
Okay, thank you very much for answering this question. And my second question is, when we talk about nationalism, it's usually the hostility between nations and national peoples. But nowadays, we rarely talk about transnational class solidarity. So I really admire your film and Jabim Comrade. I think the class structure, how these Dalit people are oppressed and victimized, and how they fight back. So we really need this kind of transnational class solidarity, because now I know I'm from China. I know so China and India, they have this kind of a hostile relations, and both government are feeling this sensation of nationalism. But both nations, they have this vertical structure of the elites and the ordinary people. They're suffering from this really unjust capitalist system. And so I'm wondering, if but I don't know, because I have written a Chinese article to introduce your films to Chinese readers, but I don't know. I think not many people have seen your films, so I'm not sure if you want to do this kind of a culture exchange thing to clear out some misunderstanding or hostility to build this solidarity. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it makes complete sense for there to be regional community. I mean, in the region. I mean, India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all the countries that are neighbors. It's crazy for them to be at war with each other and allow the Western powers to sell us weapons. I mean, that's what's been happening. Where, say, at least with India and Pakistan, where the countries that make weapons export them to these countries, and then we're perpetually at war. And when that has slowed down, then we now have a war with China, which America wants us to fight because it's a kind of a proxy war, because they need to control China, and they, in a way, will use India to do that, because they don't want their own soldiers to die in battle, but they don't mind somebody else's soldiers doing the job for them. So I think that it's very important for there to be regional solidarities built up. But while we have an India-Pakistan friendship, people-to-people friendship movement that I've been part of for many years, that I don't know of India-China friendship societies or people-to-people. It's very difficult to imagine. I don't know how it can be done, because at this moment, both countries are authoritarian, and I don't know how much space they'll allow citizens groups.
I think, campuses are perfect spaces where students that are meeting from cross-cultural backgrounds can definitely create those spaces of exchange. Hal has raised their hand. Hal, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Go ahead. Hi, Hal, you're muted. If you could just...
Yes. Yes, I can't see myself on the camera, but yeah. So I actually asked this question there, like as a long question, but my question is also about the transnational solidarity aspect and some of the challenges about that. So yeah, I greatly admire your work, and also this was a great conversation, but some of the challenges I could think of and what you have been telling here and relating to us, actually we have had the Muslim version of that in Turkey under Erdogan, and he's using the exact same strategies, tactics, as many observers would acknowledge and would, strikingly share this kind of feeling. And but the problem is he's also using now the same power of art and film and media to galvanize Indian Muslims against, or like for his own bidding, for his own Muslim leadership bidding. And the most striking example is the Resurrection Ertuğrul movie, which is a very popular one. And he's even like using some actors with their Twitter account to galvanize Indian Muslims, not through a anti-authoritarianism kind of messaging or liberation kind of messaging, but a pseudo-liberation messaging under basically like a aspiring neo-Ottomanist ruler, helping all these oppressed Muslims worldwide. So this is really like getting in the way of building a real transnational solidarity, as we are trying to build among all the people, like from Kashmir to like Indian Muslims to like in Latin America, in Turkey with the Kurds and with the Armenians, etc. So instead of that, now that you find them supporting Turkey against Armenian genocide, for instance. So how can we use the power of movie and art to counter that? And you are already doing that, but how can we move forward with that and to also deal with these challenges?
So I can't really give you that advice as such, but I mean, I was always wondered what happened to the legacy of Ataturk. How did that get dismantled so quickly into what Erdogan is doing now? Because Turkey was always a place where you saw a different face of, you didn't see the kind of crazy Islamic ideas. You saw a much more progressive uh, version of that. So how that changed, I don't know. I would imagine that you could possibly go back in history and the find ways of telling uh, people what was possible once upon a time and should be possible today. I mean, I don't know enough about Turkey, so this might be
No,
very
it wasn't about Turkey, but it was about how to build these transnational networks. It isn't about this specific of Turkey, but like
no, I was addressing how to challenge the fundamentalist idea, and that would be different for. I mean, in a sense, they're very similar. They're not that different, whether it's a Hindu fundamentalist or Muslim fundamentalist. Um, my own view about Muslim fundamentalism, again, I'm being very simplistic, but I think that the actual crusades happened hundreds of years ago, where religious wars took place, and then the idea of Islamic fundamentalism was recreated by colonial powers and by countries like America that used Islamic, that encouraged Al Qaeda, and in Pakistan,
yes,
wanted to get rid of when they wanted to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and so you see, once you have a more historical view of how these things emerged, that is one way that you can tackle them. That is one way that I think they stand revealed. That when somebody, you know yeah, I'm not sure I'm that what I'm saying is useful to you or not, because
it is useful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There is Iqbal who has a question. Iqbal, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. It's such a privilege to be here with Anand. I met him in 2014, and it was a really inspiring meeting, and it's wonderful to see him again. And wonderful to be with the panel as well. What a great panel. My question is for the whole panel. I would like to move the discussion perhaps to the films of Anand as film qua film, rather than as just political tracks. Because when I'm watching a film like Jai Bhim Comrade or Reason, they are powerful works of art. They are not only moving, but there is a movement from the personal to the bigger issues, and that's very effectively and powerfully done. It's the work of a masterful filmmaker. So perhaps it'll be interesting to hear the panel discussing that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to answer that question, Iqbal. I think you're absolutely right. In terms of the actual art and craft of filmmaking, these are masterful works. They challenge the notion of sold by broadcasters and around the objectivity of the documentary. These are highly subjective film essays that are filled with integrity and undisputable facts. Yet they come from a, Anand is very clear of where he stands in his perspective, and that clarity, I think, allows the audience to then position themselves to his argument, rather than the filmmaker hiding behind a cloak of the objective truth. Anand offers a, a very clear, subjective, lived experience that is hard to deny. I also think that the work is as any masterwork, is seemingly simple and seemingly effortless, and that it just flows. But it's the crafting and the structuring of the films, therefore the arguments embedded in them are done in a way that that I think is really important to examine and to study in terms of the very craft of putting a film essay together.
I'd like to speak to this question as well. I think as cinema, one of the astounding things that Anand's work does is, in documentary form, create this epic narrative. And this was sort of the power of cinema, like people like Eisenstein and all talk about it, using academic terms now, like dialectical montage and so on, you're able to actually integrate across space and time to create a new meaning. But the absolute kind of epic form that Anand's films take, I think, all the way from Punjab and the films on Ayodhya, but then War and Peace, I think, was a real kind of shift to raising the level of the ways in which these spaces and people work together. To Jai Bhim Comrade, where Anand takes us back to history as well, where he's asking how can Dalit people belong to the BJP? He's like, why? What are you doing here? So sort of also questioning people to reason. So one, I think, is this kind of epic narrative where there's so many people who are involved. There's so many individuals who are involved in creating this world, this history that we're part of. The other thing I think, which is quite profound about Anand's work, which I love, is just poetry and song and music and the films, and which is something like documentary is not supposed to have, right? So I think that, Salam Bombay, not Salam, Bombay, our city. Yes. Yes, bad slip. But yeah, Bombay, our city. I mean, that song, and the whole, and it's not just one song, but there's at least one song which occurs as a motif, the tune, but then there are these singers and so on. And again, so the Kabir Manch, Kala Manch, these singers and culture is very much kind of part of the films. So it creates this space to join, to become part of the world in an emotional way in which music operates. So I would say, and the third is just the crafting of it, which Ali mentioned. Last time I saw Reason and got a chance to talk with Anand, it was like, how do you put all this together? Do you have index cards, or what do you do? How do you, put all of this together? Because it's not linear in any way. It's not chronological. And it teaches you to go back and forth and hold these time zones in your head. So that's a start to your answer, Iqbal.
So actually, I do have index cards, but they're not, and they're color coded. So I put them on a board and then I move them around to see what might go with what, theoretically, and then on the editing table, because I'm sure everybody has something like that going on.
But I think the question was so beautiful also, Iqbal, because what I like also is that the crafting is, and creating a certain kind of sensitization with a large cross-section of people. It's not just focusing the camera on one person. And I always feel watching these films that I'm having a conversation with the society that we are part of. I think that for me has been such an essential part, and it has impacted me in a very massive way, because I realize it is not just one voice. It is a collective voice. And that's what, gives me that sense of hope, because even if the subject actually gives me, a lot of, discomfort. I mean, even watching Reason, just the clip right now this morning, when we started it off also, it made me feel so uncomfortable. But at the same time, I realized that if this is happening to a large cross section of people and people are responding in a certain way, it is so essential. And then it allows us to take responsibility. I think that's what I like about the crafting of this work also. Ali, I'm so sorry I jumped in.
No, it's okay.
Go ahead, Ali, you were saying something?
No, I lost my thought there.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Well, it'll come back. It'll come back.
Okay.
To say about the music, it's true that if I look back at my films, there's a lot of music in them, but it's always, one thing is that I very early decided that I would not use background music. I would not. If you see any of those films, is very rarely do you hear any music which is not identifiable. I mean, the people who are producing that music are part of the story. It's very rare that I use completely music that is external to what you're seeing. So in a sense, because as a documentary filmmaker, I'm working with found material. I'm not creating that material. I'm not actually making the things happen in front of my camera or in front of my microphone, but I'm discovering what there is already in the world and then putting that together. And even in terms of narration, I mean, I write narration for my films only when I fail to tell that story in any other way. When I couldn't find enough things that would link what I wanted to say with, connect different parts of the film and make sense of it. So when I cannot find any other way, then I write something and speak it. But with music, sometimes I don't need to write anything because the music has already done that. So I'm looking at poetry and music which already exists, that becomes part of the story.
Also, if I could add one more thing here, the way you also use songs with images. So I'm thinking maybe this is in Jai Bhim Comrade, like they're singing, but what we're seeing is, these glittering spaces of like modern India or whatever, brand India. So there's always that between the image and the music as well.
And the music doesn't have to be the music of the good guys. I also use the music of the bad guys. If you notice, in Reason, I mean, for instance, the Brahminical ideology is expressed in music. I mean, you see towards the end of the film, the song written by Savarkar, who's called Veer in India, which means brave, although he actually was one of the ideologues who created the word Hindutva. And he basically has a song saying that we need to weaponize. We need to weaponize because the world, the world is full of tigers and crocodiles and evil beasts, and the only way we can survive in the world is to have our weapons. And it is used as a kind of justification for militant Hindutva today. So I think that music is very revealing, as I said, not only of the people who are using it as a form of resistance to the oppression, but by the oppressors themselves.
Ali, do you remember it now?
Well, I think you also point out that how music is used on the ground in India, right? I mean, it's very much used as, in many cases, as oral histories of a movement. These are literally the people composing the lyrics and setting it to song are the modern day bards of the ordinary people. And this goes back to a very long tradition in India. And you're absolutely right. And the right also taps into that very same idiomatic form of song and music. So
they do much more than we do.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that's why they are in power, because they have their finger on the cultural movement. They've used culture. In fact, if you recall, I mean, the RSS, the Hindu nationalists, I mean, the key main body, was banned in 1948 when Mahatma Gandhi was killed, because they were held responsible. And they went, when they got banned, they promised that they would not do politics anymore and they would be a cultural body. And actually that helped them immensely, because they concentrated on being a cultural body, and they spread invisibly all over the country, in different ways. And of course, the right wing has ready-made culture, because religion has existed for thousands of years. And so they have all these religious icons and religious, in India especially. I mean, festivals, every other day is a holiday, because we have so many different religions and so many different, and even the Hindu religion itself has so many different forms that you could have the whole year of holidays and festivals. And they do that. And the right wing has all this ammunition. And the progressive movement hasn't been able to match it at all. And that is where they have failed. That is why a country that actually, when we became independent, it was largely because of the socialist democratic movement that fought for Indian independence. The right wing of those days was collaborating with the British, whether they were the Hindu right wing or the Muslim right wing. Mm-hmm. They collaborated with the British. They were actual partners. And this progressive movement that brought us independence has sort of given up its space. And that is what we're facing right now, is because we didn't do the cultural work. We didn't use our.
I think there's also, I just want to tie this thought to an earlier thought comparing the rise of Islamic fundamentalism in Turkey and so-called Hindu fundamentalism. I don't see Hindutva necessarily being solely about Hindu fundamentalism. I mean, as you said, Hinduism as a religious space has an immense diversity of thought, ideas, and I'm sure Jim would agree with me on that. But what Hindutva is trying to do is it's trying to model, is in fact trying to mirror the very religions it attacks, Islam and Christianity, and presenting Hinduism as a singular, cohesive religious phenomena, which is absolutely not. The difference, and this ties into the clip that the absolutely chilling clip for me that we started from Reason, of the cow vigilantes lynching poor Muslims. That Hindutva as a whole, as a political ideology, is built singularly on the demonization of Muslims and the perceived collective victimhood of the so-called Hindu majority at the hands solely of Muslims. Right. So this is the driving force.
In their holy text of the Hindutva, I mean, one of them is Guru Golwalkar's writings.
Yes.
And they had three main enemies. Number one were the Muslims. Number two were the Christians.
Communists.
And number three were the communists.
Yeah.
So they had it figured out 100 years ago, almost.
And it's interesting. A little factoid that most people get shocked by is that the most popular, the best-selling book in India for decades, that is pirated and sold over and over again is Mein Kampf. It's a book that is sold in all bookstores. It's sold by the kids who come to sell you books and magazines at traffic stops. It's all pervasive. It's everywhere.
And I don't know, have you ever tried to read it? Because it's very difficult to read. It's like so inane.
But that is the very model for Hindutva, as opposed to a truly religious fundamentalist model.
There is one person, Hitakshi, who would like to ask a question. Go ahead. You're muted though.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Hello, Mr. Patwardhan. It's a pleasure to see you. And I really want to thank Dr. Sheikh. Every time I see an email like this, I'm from public health. I'm a physician. And, this is just something that I have enjoyed from my days at the University of Minnesota as a student, and the campus gave us these opportunities to watch films, and I got introduced to Anand Patwardhan. And then when I came to India, I actually had the opportunity to come to your house. You invited me. I wanted to pick up a few series, and you said, come over, pick it up. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And here you are. I have an opportunity to see you in this lockdown. And, you mentioned, you talked about diminishing resources and how they are driving authoritarianism. And it's such a potent point that you make. Because to me, this COVID pandemic and what I am seeing with my patients and my loved ones is a mini glimpse into the climate change that we are headed into head on, totally. And to me, it feels like this is what the finale is going to be, where nobody can help anybody. We're all going to be on our own, and that's how we are going down. But, where do you see hope? And, do you think it is just set to get worse then? If authoritarianism is just about, I'm not just, but you said the simple facile answer would be that. And
so I don't know if I'm always an optimist, or I try to be an optimist, but I think that, but every time I'm proven wrong quite often. But again, I think that we're at a stage where things are going to change for the better, because it's all becoming so transparent now. I mean, the fact that the regime in power in India right now cannot deal with what's happening, because they have, in the last 1.5 years, done nothing to prevent this pandemic. They have done everything to exacerbate it. And whether, as we talked about earlier, elections, religious gatherings, all kinds of stuff, unthought out lockdowns, which affected the poorest of the poor without giving them any other form of sustenance. So yeah, they have no clue. And one thing that happens in India, everyone says, if we get rid of this government, who is there left? But anybody else would be better than what we have. And that's where I hope the people realize that is true, that we don't have to search for an alternative to what we have. Anybody else will do. Any other party could not be worse than what's going on right now.
Yeah, I so agree with you. Thank you for that answer. That's the first time I have heard this in the many, many years that I have questioned this government, because every time, people turn around and ask me, if not Modi, then who? And I have reminded them that, I don't have to have an answer to that question. That does not allow people to be doing what they're doing.
Let us look at the alternatives. We have Rahul Gandhi, the leader one of the leaders of the Congress Party, who's been made a fool of by the media, so that he's called Pappu and he's called all kinds of. He's not a good politician, undoubtedly, but he's not, as far as I can make out, he's not a bad human being, and he actually warned the country about the pandemic more than a month before any action was taken.
Right.
Before,
And I think
before
that
Trump came to
he's,
India, yeah,
he's spoken up, right? I mean, look at the points
spoken
that
up.
he's making. Somehow this Pappu is the only one who has the courage to speak up, right?
Yeah, and I'm
And
not even saying that I want the Congress back in power. I'm
correct.
just saying
Absolutely.
that it could be a coalition of opposition parties. I think a coalition would work well in India.
Right. We
Because
just have to give people an opportunity. I think that we have to explore. We don't have to be living under this authoritarianism.
And if you look at the farmers movement, I mean, they're amazing. I mean, I was on a webinar with Dipti about a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's amazing work that's going on. And whatever I hear from my friends who have been, who visited there, they're extremely creative. They're extremely independent, and obviously we have huge kinds of leadership that exist in our country. It's just that they've never been, given a chance or taken seriously.
While I have the opportunity, I'm sorry, I'm taking a little bit more time. What do you think is the difference between the US and India when it comes to, democracy prevailing? We saw that Trump was voted out, and we saw that the BJP government actually came in with more power this time. And do you think it is education at the roots, or religion is something that we were talking about?
Now, I don't think America is well educated at all. I mean, in the sense that the majority of America, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the
Literacy,
people,
but literacy
is a tiny, tiny section of America. But, if you look at 50% who almost 50% voted for Trump, but at the same time, even when I visited America about a year and a half ago, I saw immediately the huge difference, even watching TV. Because on TV, I could see actual criticism of Trump on, say, CNN and a few other channels, which you just do not see in India, except maybe a Hindi NDTV, Ravish Kumar, and people like that.
Or The Wire.
Yeah, but Wire is tiny. It's an online. Wire is not a mass media. I'm talking about people who watch, which can reach millions of people. But at least in America, I found that there was an active resistance to Trump. And that's probably because the American ruling class is divided. It's not, in India, the ruling class is completely united behind the present rulers. Big money sees this as their opportunity that will never come again. And so that isn't true in America. The super rich were divided. I mean, they didn't all support Donald Trump.
Thank you. I'm going to ask, there's one question from Hannah Kim, who wants to ask if there is anybody who has responded negatively to your portrayal of any of them on screen. Has anybody reacted afterwards?
Oh, you mean people who
you have shot and you've...
Yeah. I mean, I get lots of opposition to my films, obviously. I don't get it necessarily personally very often nowadays, because for some reason the people who don't like my films have decided that the best thing to do is to not watch them. They don't. Earlier, they used to actually watch them and engage and then have a discussion and fights, which I liked. I enjoy that kind of a fight. I wish even in these kind of discussions there would be some people who don't agree with what's in the films, and that's fine. That helps the discussion move forward. But they have decided to just not. They tell their followers not to watch them either, because some of those followers actually came to attack the films but ended up watching them, and some of them actually, it made sense to them, and they actually started a process of thinking, because there's no such thing as a permanent, human beings are not born fundamentalist or crazy or authoritarian. I think that that is a process that is because of the lack of exposure. So once they get the exposure, there's a huge potential for change, and that's the potential they don't allow by making sure that their people don't watch the films and making sure that such films don't get around enough.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it kind of it's very inspirational, because if we can have those discussions, those commentary, that, exchanges constantly, that may actually keep pushing our own understanding of the situation also. Anand, I'm just yes, go ahead.
A little bit of that happens on things like Facebook. I mean, where
Mhm.
I get trolled a lot and I give it back to the trollers, and we end up actually having sometimes an interesting discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think I've seen you, and you've always kind of engaged with them every single time. I'm just looking at the watch, so we need to wrap up as well. And I really want to thank you, Anand, for your commitment, your dedication. It's truly, truly an inspiration. And we are hoping that the DocuSeek will encourage future generations to study as well as persevere with the same desire and drive to uphold truth to power, to uphold truth to power as you do. Thank you so much. Julie, on to you.
Thank you. Just really quick, this was such a treat. I just wanted to thank Anand, all the panelists, for your time, all the attendees. This has been really, really, really amazing. Real quick, a lot of questions about the recording. We will be sending it out in a couple of days. And other than that, I just wanted to quickly also mention, so I mentioned at the beginning, academic streaming is available on DocuSeek. And for those that are not associated with the university or college, personal home use screening is available on Ovid TV in the US and Canada. And any questions, please feel free to write DocuSeek at sales@docuseek2.com, sales@docuseek2.com. Otherwise, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Buddies.
Great to see you, Anand.
Yeah.
Great to get to meet you, Jim. Bye.
Bye.